Chapter 8, Tales of Rothery Road. Life for me in those early years was very trying. Trying to catch up or keep up. It seemed like as soon as I started to get used to the lay of the land, it would change. First to change was the house I lived in. Then the people who lived in it. Then their comings and goings. Their chores, their jobs, their friends. It was never ending. And in the middle of it all, there was me. Trying to be a regular kid, with an irregular heart. 1952, Corrimal. I had just got my bearings at Crown Street, when Mum and Dad relocated to a house in Corrimal. It was on Rothery Road and it ran west to east from the Prince's Highway to the sea. As roads go, it was typical of the day. Bitumen down the center, gravel either side, with no curbing or guttering. Or footpath. The street number was 77, or at least it was, after Dad installed the number on the fence post. That too changed 10 years later to number 268. We went from a small fenced-in city backyard to open paddocks as far as my 4-year-old eyes could see. Where there was a back street, now was a creek. Where there were pedestrians and shoppers, now there were horses and cows. Where there was the constant sound of people and traffic, there was birds, animals, and the wind in the coral trees. Corrimal was like that then. As were all the outlying suburbs of the Illawarra. Rural, with a touch of suburbia along the arterial Prince's Highway. A long narrow strip of coastal plain between the escarpment and the sea. It was for all intents and purposes country living. A big change from the main street of the city of Wollongong. And as a family we loved it. For the first time the Ryan family had room to move. Inside and out. We had of course further to go and mostly on foot. Be it school or work, shopping or church. On foot, by the tracks through the paddocks, or the rough and weedy paths that ran beside the road. There still was the train. A 15-minute walk to either Bellambi or Corrimal stations. It was all steam back then too. My brothers rode the rails each day to attend the Christian Brothers School back in Wollongong. But best of all, I knew digs came with a beach. Not quite half an hour away on foot. It also came with something I would grow to love, a back veranda to sit on. While all the houses were connected to the water supply and had electricity, none had a phone. You had a 15-minute walk to the Prince's Highway for the public phone box. And none had sewerage, which was more than a few years away. It would remain the family home for the next 16 years. 1952, 9 into 1, minus 2. The house at Rothery Road gave us space, mainly breathing space. The eldest in the family, Joy and Bill, had already moved out and were pursuing their new lives as a nurse and a teacher. Within 3 years brothers Kevin and Peter would also move out. Kevin with national service and Peter to train as a jockey in New Zealand. It was a typical weatherboard house of the day, inside and out, with a corrugated iron roof. Allow me then to take a moment to show you round. So here we go, mind the step. The house came with 3 bedrooms and a closed-in room on the back veranda. This much sought-after abode was immediately claimed by the eldest Kevin. It was deemed too drafty and rustic by Veronica. The 2 biggest rooms were the living room and the kitchen. The dividing wall was in the form of a brick-constructed hearth. On the kitchen side, you would find a fuel stove and in the living room, an open fireplace. The kitchen was quite large and was where the family had their meals. A definite blessing in winter, with the fuel stove in operation. Cozy warm in winter, the stove ran 18 hours a day. Dad ran it on coal and coke, which he got at reduced price through his work at the coke works. The fireplace was pretty basic, with a metal grate. Paper, kindling, and some dried wood, before the coal was added. Wonderfully warm in the cold months. I have referred to warmth and heat for good reason. The bathroom also doubled as a laundry, which came with what was called a chip heater. It was the only source of hot water in the house. The kitchen too was not without its challenges. There was one cold water tap and a large basin for washing up. No sink. As a consequence, Mum did all the washing by hand. The bathroom came with a copper. Not the local constable, you understand, but a simple device for heating the water to wash bodies and clothes. There was no shower but a bath. Booking ahead was advisable, as was good behavior, if you wanted first use of the hot water. It took a year or 3, but eventually Dad and his brother Tom, a plumber by trade, would install a bench and a sink and a hot water outlet in the kitchen. Tom also installed a hot water service that ran off the heat from the fuel stove in the kitchen, for which he received the family's eternal gratitude. Dad finished the DIY in 1961, when he installed a wood heater in the fireplace. Round about the same time as we acquired a television, if I remember correctly. 1953, first amongst locals. Living country means looking out for each other. And that means being neighborly. Our neighbors in Rothery Road would become our second family. There for emergencies, there for a lend, there for a chat. It was a community all its own. Starting on the highway side of number 77. Mr. Hobson, who was a single dad, and his son Martin. He would be the first to own a TV in Rothery Road. Next door was Miss Bolton, who was a spinster. She owned a very talkative cockatoo. Then there was a Dutch family, the Dubois, who mainly kept to themselves. Finally, and next door to us were the Molinaro family, who were Italian. Mr. Molinaro and my father were to become firm friends. On the beach side, the Musgrove family, Ray and Dorothy, who survived the Blitz in London. Then there was the Birchall family, Norm and Dell. Norm was a keen fisherman. Next were the Johnsons, Doug and Connie. Their son Brian was one of my first school friends. Next was the Allen family, whose daughter Leonie taught me how to skip. Then there was the Ridderford family, their youngest Peter was a playmate of my sister Frances. Across the street a ways were the Meyer family, their son Johnny would become brother Mark's best friend. 1954, getting about. With the family now settled in the countryside of Corrimal, my father and mother quickly realized that the one thing the family was in need of was transport. With money so tight, Dad initially secured an old Ford Ute. He carted ash from the coke works at Corrimal to help fill in the backyard where drainage was a problem. Up until then, we walked everywhere, which was tough on Mum with the stroller and me. Actually walking in any direction was tough. Tough on your shoes, particularly when it rained. And with 7 of us at school, it kept Dad busy repairing and resoling our footwear. When Grandpa Pop Bailey died, he bequeathed his old Chev to Dad. It was a royal blue 1940s 4-door sedan with overriders on the bumper bars. 1955, Mark come home. My nearest brother was Mark. He was 3 years older than me, and I really looked up to him. In the months leading up to my going to school, Mark would take me with him to sit in with his class. So I got some orientation to the school environment. Mark was a standout even then. He seemed to be able to construct or make just about anything. So one Christmas Mum and Dad recognized this with a Meccano set. A box of metal parts and screws and attachments and a set of plans, by which you could create all manner of machines. Mark loved it. His best friend was Johnny Myers. Johnny lived across the street and he too had a Meccano set. The two of them spent hours constructing and deconstructing. After school, if you wanted to find the one, you just looked for the other. Mum and Dad were of course pleased that Mark found so much enjoyment in their gift. But it had a downside. Mark had chores to do and he and Johnny would become so engrossed that they would lose track of time. Mum with the evening meal on the go would stand on our front porch, calling out, "Mark, time to come home. Mark." It became a real bugbear for both. And it would be repeated several times a week. The neighborhood could set their clocks by Mum calling out, "Mark, time to come home." Listening to this weekly routine across the way was Miss Bolton's sulphur-crested cockatoo. A mimic and quite the rascal. He was Miss Bolton's only company and she enjoyed his endless calls and mimicry. It was inevitable that the bird would pick up on what went down most afternoons at number 77. So Johnny and Mark were engaged as always one afternoon, when Mark heard the call. He packed up his Meccano and raced out the door. He arrived at full pace in our kitchen. "Okay, Mum, I'm here," he said. Mum looked at him blankly. Then at the clock. "I didn't call you, son. Look at the time." They both stood there a little nonplussed. Then they heard the call, "Mark." Mark, from across the street. True story. 1956, the corner store. No suburb in the 1950s was complete without a corner shop or two. We felt Corrimal qualified as such in 1956, when they built 4 shops directly opposite our house. All on the corner of Cross Street. That brought people together even more. A haberdashery, as people made their own clothes then. It was owned by Mrs. Mallet. There was also a greengrocer, whose name escapes me. A butcher shop, owned by Mr. Harrison. And finally, a grocery and general store owned by the Langs. Considering there was no bus service and few in Rothery Road had a car. Considering too, that most had young families, it was a godsend. The general store stocked just about everything a family might need, including a great confectionery counter. 1958, reeling it in. My brother John was an out-and-out prankster. In time his pranks would take on a legendary status. But this day he outdid himself. John and Mark were often partners in crime. They would drive Mum and Dad crazy with their antics and pranks. John was very observant too. He noticed people and behaviors around the neighborhood. He noticed, for example, the young women who worked at Hardy's Rubber, a company 5 minutes down the road. Each afternoon after work they would walk to the bus stop together. They would make their way to the highway through the long grass along the side of the road. Nothing to see here? Right? One afternoon coming home from school, through the paddocks John and Mark came across a red-bellied black snake. They killed it. Feeling a little chuffed with themselves, they dragged the poor thing home with them, trailing it through the long grass. They triumphantly announced to Mum that they had killed this snake and were promptly told to dispose of the body. Which they did, sort of. An idea came to John the next day. On arriving home, John got Mark to retrieve the snake, while he dashed inside and grabbed a length of fishing line. He attached the line behind the head of the snake and the two set off to lay in wait for the ladies on their afternoon journey. They found the perfect spot for the ambush. High grass either side of the path. Great for concealment. So they positioned the poor snake a meter or so away from the path, where no one would notice. They took up a position opposite in the high grass. And there they waited. And waited. Eventually they heard the sound of chatter and laughter as the women made their way up the road. Just as they drew level with the boys on one side of the path, John slowly pulled the line and the snake seemingly slithered across the path at the feet of the women. You could have heard the screams from the highway. The women turned and bolted for the nearest place of safety. Which just happened to be the porch of number 77. Mum of course came running out to see what the commotion was all about. She found the half-scared girls stranded on her porch calling, "Snake, snake!" Mum smelt a rat, or a reptile at least. She calmed the women down and walked with them a ways and then returned to the house. As scoldings go, it was a 10.